The project, or the gate, and its installation dates back to December of 1981, Ordinance 1559. And the area is right here, Sierra Peaks Downer Trail. In its original installation, the gate was on the west side of Downer Trail at Sierra Peaks. And it consisted of a set of bollards and a cable. Between March of 93 and September of 95, 5 different development agreements were crafted with the city and the various property owners in this area to provide for the development of various property. And that included the associated east-west connector, which, if you go back to this map, involves Sierra Peaks, Downer Trail, West Ridge, over to Gale Garden Way. In 99 and in 2000, a couple of neighborhoods specific area plans were processes were conducted and resolutions were adopted to incorporate those as planning documents for the city's benefit going forward. Both of those documents addressed the construction of the improvements, the Downer Trail, Oregon Avenue to Sierra Peaks, Downer Trail from Sierra Peaks to the east-west connector, and the east-west connector to Gale Gardner Way. And effectively, those plans recommended that the emergency crash gate, and that's how it is designated in there, in this particular document, did not come down until the east-west connector is completed and the full circulation plan is implemented. So that was in 1999. In 2006, a 6-party agreement was established, which in fact rescinded and canceled the previous development agreements and made provision for the construction of the east-west connector Downer Trail, and then ultimately relocation of the gate across Downer Trail at this location. In June of 2007, the east-west connector was completed from Downer Trail to Gale Gardner Way. In May of 2008, the improvements to Downer Trail between Oregon Avenue, again, and Sierra Peaks was completed. And that was completed by the city. Going back to that 6-party agreement, the city had the obligation to complete this segment of Downer Trail, and then the development community, and Mr. Devereaux in particular, and associated property owners made for construction of these improvements under that 6-party agreement. The final design and street configuration for Downer Trail south of Sierra Peaks was generated with public involvement. There was an open house meeting and residents attended. Through that process, there was an expressed opinion and view that the character of the rural neighborhood south of Sierra Peaks be maintained. Therefore, taking that input into consideration, the street was constructed and designed to 22 feet in width, which was in conformance with American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials standards for a rural street section. Fire Marshal approved that design, and ultimately it was constructed. No sidewalks were included in that design, and it is a 22 feet in width, if I did not say that. In July of 2008 and August of 2008, workshops were conducted to discuss opening the gate. No action was taken at the first workshop, and then in August of 2008, the council voted to not open the gate, that it should remain closed until, and discussion pertained to the design standard for Downer Trail south of the gate. And as I indicated, this was designed to a different standard than the design of Downer Trail north of Sierra Peaks Drive. This is an adopted national standard for rural streets, this design. So it is a legitimate design standard by which this street was designed and constructed. This standard up here was a brand new street. And the standard that was applied here is for local streets, and that construction was in conformance with the requirements that were of record and required by the planning process. And then most recently in January of 2011, another request was made to open the gate, and after additional discussion, the City Council voted to remain closed. As far as the engineering analysis that's gone into the area in recent years, past years, Mr. Mattingly's here to discuss that. I would also mention that ultimately, and we've talked about this before in many council meetings, when it comes to traffic and management of our streets, traffic control measures and operation, it does come down to a discretionary policy issue for council's consideration and determination ultimately at this point. Ian, would you like to go through the engineering?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As Mark mentioned, I will briefly go over the engineering analysis performed and touch on some of the safety features on Downer Trail. Let me zoom this out. Several engineering analyses have been completed, including a 1994 and 1998 BRW traffic study and a public works study done in June of 2008. The 1994 BRW study's purpose was to assist the city in developing a series of recommendations related to future circulation in the area. It was followed by a study in 1998, also by BRW, with the purpose of validating and or modifying the results from the 1994 study based on reduced land use and trip generation intensities that happened between those years. Then in 2008, a traffic study was conducted by the Public Works Department to evaluate existing volumes on Seary Peaks, Downer Trail, and Oregon Avenue for the purpose of determining the potential impact of removing the gate. Now, each of these studies have been referenced and discussed at length in several council meetings and council workshops, with the discussion focused on roadway geometrics and impacts on traffic volumes. Now, these traffic volume projections have raised concern as differing opinions about their validity have been raised. Specifically, the focus of the objection has been that the numbers are overly high due to the study assumptions, and that's been made by the public at many of our meetings we've had. Staff recognizes that the assumptions that led to these traffic volumes are based on professional opinion and experience, and that others may have used something different based on their opinion and experience had they conducted the study. However, apart from the magnitude of the increase, it is a certainty that volumes will increase some level on Downer Trail, and that has been expressed, and they will increase on Oregon Avenue if the gate is opened, and that the volumes that could be expected on both roadways will fall within the normal range for the roadway classifications. Therefore, it is staff's position that additional study will provide limited cost benefit because every study will result in increased traffic volumes on the roadway, just at varying magnitudes, now and into the future as build-out continues in the area. I'll move on to some safety stuff. The Downer Trail design maintained the rural atmosphere already in place by foregoing curb and gutter and sidewalks, in contrast to many of the subdivisions that were built north and to the west. This continued the interaction between pedestrian and vehicular traffic that already existed on Downer Trail prior to the improvement project, where pedestrians walk on the shoulder or roadway pavement, a condition which is undesirable. However, this type of roadway requiring the commingling of these uses is not uncommon in Prescott and is not patently unsafe. Some examples include Eastwood Drive, Geneva Drive, Cyclorama Drive, Horizon Hills Drive, Prescott Heights East, all of which are examples of narrow streets with similar traffic volumes and no pedestrian facilities, curb and gutter. Now, both the police and fire departments have indicated that response to the area would be enhanced by removal of the gate. But they have also affirmed that they can open the gate in the event of emergency, as the gate is locked with a key that each of those departments have. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, and I thank you.
If you have any questions, Mayor, at this time, we would be happy to address them.
Council, your time is here.
Mark, I have a question. I enjoyed listening to your chronology of what took place in the original gate. And if I'm not mistaken, you said that the original agreement for the gate to come down was rescinded, and that at some point in time the gate was moved and put back up. But was it there any point at that time when the gate was put back up, a talk of it coming back down? I know there was a trade-off at some point in time. Maybe this is where Mr. Devereaux can help us out, but
Well, my name's Tom Devereaux. I live in.
I'm sorry, Tom, I changed your name.
That's all right.
Yeah, but it was.
You'll enjoy this more than you will Don Moon. I live at 1153 Linwood. I am sort of the glue that stuck this area together. I didn't mean to, but it just worked out that way. To give you a little bit more history, because I could see some confusion, not on anybody who goes through this every year, but there's some new people here. And that is, as far as the gate went, the two bollards and the cable that were on Sierra Peaks, they were on a trail, is what they were on Sierra Peaks. Downer Trail has never gone anywhere. You've never been able to drive up Downer Trail and go anywhere. The road, when we were kids, to keep us out of Downer Pond, they pulled the boulders into the middle of the road. They didn't do a very good job because we managed to move them and wiggle around them, but the road was essentially there but closed. And when Don Myers did Forest Trails, they had to have another exit because the fire department said so, and as you know, towns are basically run by fire departments. And so they kind of plowed a little trail through the brush, and they put at the end of Downer Trail, and you turn left on Sierra Peaks, and they put up the bollards and the cable. And that's the way it was when we bought the Heritage, which is the subdivision that's that the piece of Sierra Peaks caused it to be built, and we built it. At that point in time, there was people who had thrown in on the Dalkey property, had said they wanted to develop, so they had one of the development agreements. Forest Trails was in the development agreement. We inherited some of the development agreement from Ron Jones when we bought the Heritage. Had we lived by the development agreement that was in place, keep in mind at this point in time I had not bought Downer Trail. I had not bought the Downer Trail subdivision or the preserve, my partners and I. So what was going to end up happening is Sierra Peaks was going to come down to Downer Trail, and we were obligated at that point to pave Downer Trail 20 feet wide down to Farview, and that was the end of our responsibilities. In the middle of all that, we purchased the preserve, and that gave us the opportunity to complete the east-west connector, except where all those dots are, which was the Downer 16 and what we refer to in the agreement as the gap, which was nobody was on the hook for either one of those at that point. And we came up with some pretty smart people in the room, including John Moffett and Mark and Tom Geis, and we came up with an alternative to doing anything to Downer Trail because it had utility problems and so on. We were obligated to spend an amount of money on Downer Trail that would have been basically wasted unless it was done after all the utilities were completed, and even that would have been incomplete because we were only obligated to put AB and pave the existing road. So that's when we came up with this plan. Since I was in the throes of starting the preserve and completing or doing the biggest portion of the east-west connector, we went to another developer in there that owned the Downer 16. We talked him into not waiting And we assured him that it would not cost him anything but his own improvements. He would not have to participate in any of the rest of ours abandoned agreements that this would take care of it, and those of us that were involved would take care of it. Brian Tucker, who bought a piece of the Dalkey property a long time ago, was invited. If he wanted to pay his fair share, then he could, in the future, take advantage of it by being able to develop his 15 acres in the Dalkey. Otherwise, he would have been excluded from that. This Land West property that's on this map, they were contacted several times. They did not choose to pay anybody's share. And so it'll be interesting to see when they decide to develop with the council, what staff does to them first, does with them first, and what council does to them later. But they were not cooperative, and we could have used their help in a couple of areas. At any rate, at the end of the day, the fire department was there, the police department was there, we were all there, and we decided this was the safest thing to do, was to build an east-west connector without stop signs, without, you know, a bunch of hocus pocus down there at the corner of Sierra Peaks and Downer, and exit onto Gale Gardner, as prior studies had concluded that Oregon Avenue was not feasible to widen, and Downer Trail had and has right-of-way problems, grade problems, rock problems, and so on. I don't believe that any of the comparisons that were made to like Horizon Hills or Geneva or any of those streets are anything valid, only in that they have absolutely no potential to dump the kind of traffic that can be dumped on Downer Trail this way. And while I believe that the studies may be semi-valid, eventually we would have found it when we were kids. We'd find a faster way to get from Thumb Butte to Iron Springs Road by using this for a cutoff road. To say that people won't figure it out and use it from Iron Springs over during peak traffic times and not drive down into the big old cluster and whatnot that goes on every day. But regardless of that, I don't really have a dog in this fight as far as Downer Trail goes. I own a lot of lots along this road. Having some of the traffic taken off of it might be a good thing, but I do live in this city, and I do watch how litigious people have become and how often we get sued around here for things that aren't really anybody's fault. They're usually the person who did its fault, and we pay them anyway. Plus, I do own some property that is up Sierra Peaks. I own several lots yet up near Enchanted Canyon and along Sierra Peaks Drive, and I don't believe I really want to stop at a stop sign every time I come down to that intersection. The intersection was designed to meet the intent of a minor connector, even though the roadway would be wider if it had been designated as a minor connector. Because it's being used as a minor connector, now it is a minor connector. And you know, I don't know what brings this to the forefront. I think if the people who have signed a petition that live in forest trails and other places, I don't know whether they're going to DES or to get Mexican food, but and maybe it's the Thumb Butte thing, but it's really not that great of a shortcut. And I think if they realized that the rest of the time when they were actually going to Fry's or over to Walmart or whatever, they would find that stopping at that stop sign would become more of a problem than they gain by having this gate open. This comes up every year because somebody has a house in there that won't sell. We all know that. It's not a big secret. And I don't know that the house would sell regardless of whether the gate's open, closed. We could move it down the street a little bit so that house was accommodated by it, but you know, it have its own set of problems. Right now people have become used to it, and it's worked. It was never intended to be open. We wouldn't have treated it like the driveway. I mean, the intersection when we changed this was already designed, and we knocked that design in the head, spent $6,000 redesigning it to the configuration you see now, with the big rounded corner, no traffic enhancement, no stop signs, and Downer Trail looks like a driveway, and that was all on purpose. That wasn't so someday, you know, that we would change it, unless Downer Trail was going to change and become, you know, get widened and which would dump onto Oregon, which would need to be widened. So the only dog I really have in this fight is that I ride my bike to Thumb Butte up Oregon 50 times a year, and it's relatively safe, and that I own lots up Sierra Peaks, and one of them which I intend to live on, and I don't want to stop at a stop sign every time I come down the hill. Other than that, I'm just here because I know a few more pieces of the puzzle, not really many more than Mark does, and I can say some things that Mark can't say, so.
Mr. Devereaux?
Sure.
Mr. Devereaux, my question for you is what you were just talking about. At the bottom there where Sierra Peak comes into Downer Trail, where the big light sweep is down there, if you go out there and you look at it, common sense is gonna tell you that that was not designed to be driven over except for an emergency vehicle if the gates ever open. Was that in the original agreement that you built it that way to carry the drainage off with the big sweep in it?
Yes, it was in the agreement that we would make it, that it would be treated like it was a driveway as opposed to being treated like it was
That's true.
a roadway that wasn't open yet.
Thank you.
Anyone else, questions?
Yes, sir. I was wondering, did you have any community meetings with the people in Downer Trail when that road was put in to talk with them about having it an access road when first developed?
Not that I ever attended. I had some phone calls from some of the people that wondered what was gonna go on. I didn't do it on their account. I did it because if we hadn't done it that way, then there wouldn't have been any east-west connector probably now, because the timing was poor. Well, the city could have built it. Instead, they got it built. When people say, well, Downer Trail should be driven on because the city paid for it, well, yeah, the city paid for it, but it was a trade. We would have paid for what cursory work would have been done to it. Instead, we traded it to do, to complete that dotted section of the east-west connector.
Can I ask you, Mr. Devereaux, if by memory you can remember what that portion of that dotted section of the east-west connector cost you for permission to build your development?
It cost the 600 feet of it that didn't have anybody else's participation cost $237,000 in court, including engineering. The next, I don't remember how many feet it was, that was the Downer 16. We contributed another $115,000 to that effort because there was some realignment of that road. There was some redesign of that road that had to take place and some additional blasting to get the corners in it softened to meet some ASHTO requirements.
Yeah, and you know, I've heard your name from time to time. I really don't know who you are. And you know, we've met, but
Sure.
I don't know who you are. But do you find that a common deal here in the city where we, in order for you to exercise your right to develop your private property, you gotta do certain trade-offs for certain benefits to the city?
Oh, yeah, I mean, developers built this city. The part of it that's been built while I was alive.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes,
Charlie?
sorry, just a quick question on the part that you developed, did you say that you designed that to ASHTO standards as well?
Well, we designed it, we caused it to be designed to ASHTO standards. There was some pieces, most of it was happening that way anyway. But when you build something brand new, you don't really have any reason not to. I mean, you can soften, you know, you can change radiuses on corners. You're in the plot process. You may lose some footage on this lot and gain some footage on that lot, but eventually, you know. And so we had a couple of things in the Downer 16 that we worked out with Dale Walk at the time. Walks anyway. So we changed some things, but yeah, it's built to ASHTO standards, but it's not. I think today a minor connector would be 32 feet wide. It's only 28 feet. And there's a reason for that. I mean, if you go through there and try to look at what it would have taken to make it 8 feet wider, you would see that there would have been a lot of trees and rocks and stuff that would have had to be blown up.
Thank you.
Tom, I have just a couple of things, and I'm reading from a staff report, and I'm trying to none of the seven of us have a dog in this hunt either.
I understand.
We,
You're civil volunteers.
yeah. Construction of the east-west connector from Downer Trail at Sierra Peaks Drive to Gale Gardner Way was completed with the roadway opened in April 2008, and I think that's what we're talking about. Constructions of improvements to Downer Trail between Oregon Avenue and Sierra Peaks Drive was completed May 22nd, 2008. The final street design configuration was generated with public involvement through an open house meeting held with area residents in February of 2007, and I'm assuming that's the meeting that you were talking about. The residents preferred a more rural character be maintained in the project area in contrast to the new subdivisions nearby. Reflecting that public input, the project was developed to avoid impacting existing trees along the roadway. The pavement was constructed 22 feet in width, meeting ASSHTO standards for rural streets, and was reviewed and approved by the fire marshal. And curb and gutter was installed only at the intersection of Farview Lane and Downer Trail. No sidewalks were construction, and the gate formerly on Sierra Peaks Drive, immediately west of Downer Trail, was relocated on Downer Trail south of Sierra Peaks Drive. The street design on Downer Trail with its accompanying width, serpentine alignment, and elevation changes provides inherent traffic calming, promoting lower roadway speeds. Was that these true statements along the way?
Well, I gotta tell you that, that was after my time, when I no longer had involvement in Downer Trail, so I assume that that was the neighborhood meeting that was had before the city let their contract to improve the infrastructure under the street, and then come in and do the street. Mark agrees with me there.
Mayor and Council, that is correct. That public meeting was a part of the design process for Downer Trail south of Sierra Peaks down to Oregon Avenue.
Okay. During any of that time, Mark, and we were not there either, did the city make a commitment or an assumption that the gate would always be locked? Or was there any discussion in the public meeting that possibly something could happen in the future that might change that?
Mayor and Council, I can't remember specifically the discussion in the public meeting as it relates to the gate. I can tell you that we at the time were aware that the gate was required by the ordinance and that it was to be in place through the construction of the east-west connector and the gap above north of Sierra Peaks. We knew all those things. All those things would have been communicated. There were no mention of plans for the removal of the gate associated with the improvement of Downer Trail south of the gate.
Jim?
Yeah, just a question while you're up there, Mark. You talked about some underground infrastructure that needed to be maintenance or whatever. Did the underground infrastructure that needed to be taken care of necessitate disturbing the roadway that was in place, that necessitated replacing the roadway that you disturbed to get to the underground infrastructure? Is that something that took place?
Mayor Pro Tem Emerson, council members, the road that was in place prior to the improvements, it was an unimproved facility, aggregate base course, a graded roadway. It did have utilities beneath its surface. During the construction of the improvements for Downer Trail south of the gate, the sewer main was completely reconstructed. New services were established to the property owners. New water main was constructed, and new water services were installed for the benefit of those adjacent property owners as well. And then the pavement was, and some limited drainage improvements were also included, and then the pavement was placed, and that's what you have now.
So I guess my question there being, Mark, and you know, we go through a lot of stuff day in and day out when you sit up here. If memory serves me right, the infrastructure that was necessary under the existing old roadway that you were talking about was as much an impetus to tear that road up and redo it as was redoing it after it was tore up to a different level than what it was done prior.
Mayor Pro Tem, Mr. Devereaux was correct when he talked about a prior development agreement before the six-party agreement, wherein the obligation under that agreement for improving Downer Trail south of Sierra Peaks down to Farview Lane only made provision for paving. It had no provision for those utilities, and that was a needed infrastructure improvement that naturally fell back to the city because it was an existing facility.
So what could have happened is we could have gone in there and paved it and then had to tear it up anyway to redo the water and the sewer.
We would hope not to do that, but that's a possibility.
That's my point. We ran into the same issue up on Copper Basin. You could have done a little of this and a little of that, but you're gonna have to tear the road up to get to what you needed to get to. Then you were gonna have to put it back down. So that was,
That's correct.
thanks.
Any more questions of Tom?
Maybe of Mark or maybe of Gary, why is it that this keeps coming back if there was an ordinance in place to keep this gate there?
I can answer that, Mark. The original ordinance goes back, I think, what, 81 or something like that. And that ordinance basically left it discretionary, and all these things have happened since their time. Obviously, we had development agreements that were originally done. That development changed. There was a six-party agreement that repealed all those development agreements, and Mr. Devereaux kind of explained that. And why does it?
But did the ordinance change?
The ordinance is still council discretion when and if you decide to do that. And, the mayor had asked a question. I'll just, on the minutes back, and this is April 11, 2006, there was, at that time, I think when the six-party agreement was going through, there was a presentation and conditions about the crash gate that just said in the future, council determined, per the minutes, determine in the future whether the crash gates to be relocated down a trail south of Sierra Peaks should be removed. While in place, gate can be opened by city emergency services. So that's the history back in 2006. And again, that ordinance is still in place, so there's still whatever discretion, council has, subject to people requesting it, I suppose.
I'd like to point out one thing, and that is the neighborhood meeting that they had that I wasn't at because I was about the construction of Downer Trail. At that point in time, had the people on Downer Trail wanted to give away the rural and make it like the other side of the gate, which is where I'm at, where my subdivisions are, and several others, and some of them had wanted to give up some right-of-way, and that's what they wanted. I think that what the meeting was about was to determine what the people on Downer Trail would accept as a minimum because of the difficulty of making a full-blown improvement, 28-foot street, curb gutter, sidewalk. There's right-of-way issues, there's hill issues, there's rock issues, and so on. I think there was a choice made there by both the city and by the neighborhood to do something less, as opposed to making it, to bringing it up to a spec. Had someone in there been going to develop it, had I owned 20 acres down that road, as Jim pointed out, I would have had to improve the road to the same standards that we built Ridgewood, regardless of how much or how little of it that I owned. But since this was existing and we were putting a Band-Aid, rather than put a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, all the utilities were going to be brought up to speed, and the people were allowed to give their the minimum that what they would like to see in their neighborhood, and that's what they chose, and the city was fine with that because of the difficulty of doing anything different. Plus, at the end of the day, so leave the gate down, and then what have you done to Oregon? Anyway, that's what I think the meeting was about. I wasn't there, Mark.
Anyone else, Tom? Tom, thanks very much.
You bet.
Hi, my name is Chris Dunn, 629A Downer Trail. Basically, I've seen a couple times where I go down to the mailbox or driving the car down the driveway on the top of Downer Trail. There's cars that are confused, or trucks that they go up there and there's a gate. But the biggest one I saw was about over a year ago was as you mentioned, Lifeline ambulance up there. And she's fumbling through the map, and she goes, the gate. I told her how to go around unless you want to crash through the gate. And there's also, I have called the police department to open the gate last year sometime. They referred me to Public Works. And I told them how that gate is considered more than just a fire gate, but for a flood gate, because it has been open for a flood and also for snow. But they referred me to the Public Works, and they didn't know that the fire department and the police department had keys. So hopefully they got everything together. But my thing is the gates sometimes need to be open for those types of emergencies. And but for me, it was a lifeline where somebody's life might have been at stake if whatever was going on at that moment. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Carol Russell, 555 Downer Trail. Honorable Mayor and members of the council, I appreciate the time to speak to you today. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not being paid to speak to you. I am here to tell you that Mr. Musgrove represents the only person in our neighborhood south of the gate who wants the Downer Trail emergency gate opened. I have a petition here with 172 signatures requesting that the gate remain closed. 131 of these signers are people in the neighborhood who would be directly impacted by the opening of the gate, including 5 signers from the properties immediately north of the gate. The remaining 41 are people who walk or bike in the neighborhood. No one we spoke to wants the gate opened. Everyone is concerned about the very real safety issues of introducing more traffic on Downer Trail in Oregon. The petition submitted by Mr. Musgrove on March 6th has 80 signatures, all dated 2010. 51 of the signers are from the Forest Trails area. The remaining 29 are from other areas like Williamson Valley, Prescott Valley, and as far away as Glendale. Mr. Musgrove stated on March 6th and again in the Prescott Courier that no engineering data or traffic study exists. I'm glad that Mr. Mattingly's presentation showed this claim is factually inaccurate. We have the West Prescott Street Location Study by Will Dan Associates, which concludes Downer Trail and Oregon Avenue are the worst choice for a second access from Forest Trails. That was before the east-west connector was built. Also, the West Prescott Circulation Traffic Analysis by BRW, which gives us hard data on traffic volumes if the gate were opened. At that time, 3,200 cars a day on Oregon Avenue and 1,800 cars a day on Downer Trail for scenario 6A. Once full build-out of the platted subdivisions north of the gate occurs. Now, I heard today that some of these numbers may be based on assumptions that have changed, but I believe it is only a matter of time until the traffic exceeds the capacity of these 2 roads. In addition, there is engineering available regarding South Downer Trail pavement project from 2007, which you've been discussing. This was the rural standard paving overlay of the existing roadbed on South Downer with no improvements as to alignment, slope, or width, and which satisfied the city's contractual requirements of the 6-party agreement for road development in West Prescott, as Mr. Devereaux described. As Mr. Nutowski said, there is also engineering data on the east-west connector, which would show that Westridge, which provides that much-needed second exit from Forest Trails, was constructed as is befitting a connector road, 28 feet wide with reasonable slopes and curves, excellent drainage, a pedestrian sidewalk, and accommodation for a traffic light at Gale Gardner Way. It seems clear from all these engineering and traffic studies that the city had no intention of making Downer Trail and Oregon Avenue a connector road. The 6-party agreement created the east-west connector, providing safe egress for the residents north of the gate. This agreement called for the gate, formerly at Sierra Peaks, to be relocated to Downer Trail. Mr. Musgrove stated that the gate has never been opened so that current traffic levels could be counted. Here is why. Because current traffic volumes are no indication of future traffic volumes. The traffic levels determined by the BRW study are based on full build-out of the 880 platted lots north of the gate. Due to the economic downturn from which we are still recovering, A very large number of those lots remain undeveloped as yet. Opening the gate to count cars would not be useful in determining what is safe for the neighborhood. As for Mr. Musgrove's concern that 3, 5, 7, or 10 extra minutes are required to travel to the hospital, I believe that was addressed at the last go-around 14 months ago, when it was established that every police car, fire truck, and hopefully every ambulance in this town has a key to that emergency gate. There is one engineering study that perhaps Mr. Musgrove would agree would be very interesting to add to this discussion. And that is the cost of improving South Downer Trail and Oregon Avenue once the traffic increases to a collector status, as it will someday. How many millions of tax dollars would it cost to make that route into a connector? How many historic homes on Oregon that have no setback would need to be condemned? How much would a bridge cost to replace the low water crossing at Miller Creek? How much would it cost to remove boulder piles the size of houses, erase a roller coaster slope, and still provide access to pre-existing driveways? How much money would it take to solve drainage issues where seasonal springs bubble up at manholes covering the road with ice? If Mr. Musgrove thinks the gate should be open for the convenience of some, let's be sure we know the full impact of this decision on city coffers before we proceed. Thank you.
My name is Tana Karen Akins, and I live at 1408 Oregon Avenue. My neighbor next door had to go and pick up her children, so she asked me if I would read this for her. My name is J. Diane Benderson, and I live at 1412 Oregon. I just bought this home in June 2010, and these are the reasons for speaking out against the gate opening. This would increase the volume of traffic. This is Hank, age 4.5 years old, and Phoebe, age 2.5 years old. These children ride on Oregon and walk on Oregon. They're learning to ride their bikes, and they go up the street to visit, on Shasta, to visit Flynn Park regularly. I vehemently oppose the opening of this gate. I am against the Downer Trail gate opening. This is my part now. Donna Karen Aiken, sorry. I bought my home on Oregon 2.5 years ago, and since then walk my dogs daily on Oregon Avenue, and in that time I've witnessed 3 accidents already. The first was 2 cyclists pushed into a fence by a truck. The second was a couple and their dog dive into a hedge to avoid a speeding car. And the third was 2 young children on bikes crash into a parked car due to a swerving car avoiding an oncoming big truck. Did you get that one? Okay. Last year, a friend broke his collarbone and cracked 3 ribs trying to avoid a loose dog and an oncoming car on Oregon. Neighbors have witnessed other accidents, including one in which a little girl on her bike was hit by a speeding car on Oregon. She suffered severe head and other injuries. I think that one was registered by the police department. That was a few years ago. It's already tricky enough, dangerous enough as it is. More traffic would equal more accidents. I really love my neighborhood. I moved to Prescott to move onto Oregon Street 8 years ago, to move to the house that I am living in. It's historic, it's quaint, it's rural, and it's nature-filled. We're a really close, cohesive community of folks. And every day, babies are carried and pushed along Oregon, while kids and adults tricycle, walk, run, skip, and cycle along Oregon, Downer Trail, and the other roads. Oregon's really narrow, only 18.5 to 20 feet at points. It has sunken sewer drains, no sidewalks, and residents park on the right-of-way because there's little or no on-site parking. Downer Trail is only between 20 and 25 feet, and it's very steep and windy, as you've heard. with no sidewalks or right-of-way, but it does have drop-offs, ditches, boulders, trees, and gas meters right beside the pavement, right beside, not 2 inches away sometimes. There is not sufficient room for 2 large vehicles to pass in places. One has to stop quickly and hopefully has seen the other car quickly enough. Please just drive on Oregon and Downer Trail, walk on Oregon and Downer Trail, and you'll just see. It's just not safe. Mr. Musgrove said that there is no north-south connector trail on the west side. I beg to differ. Gale Gardner is the north-south connector. I can understand that Mr. Musgrove's client, Mr. Anderson, which is why we're here today, just wants to sell his house. I really can. Yet I am much more concerned with the safety of the people who live in this neighborhood, who want to continue to live here. I'm concerned about the children, the pets, and the adults in the neighborhood. Do you want to swap the safety of the residents of Oregon and Downer Trail for a few minutes' convenience for some to drive downtown? Safety must take precedence over one house sale and 1 minute's driving convenience if they're going downtown. Please keep the gates closed for our safety. Do you really want to trump safety for convenience and the sale of one house?
Yes, my name is Arthur Anderson. I'm the villain in this piece. You have a copy of remarks I prepared. I think it's been an interesting afternoon so far to try to rewrite history. So let's step back a minute and talk about the history. In 1999, the city initiated a Westside neighborhood plan. They included the Surrey Peaks area, they included the Downer Trail area, they included Oregon, and they included a few others. This is not the first time I've talked to you gentlemen. I've talked to you individually, privately, not really privately, in your office here. We've had extended conversations. I read the preparation that Mr. Natepsky had for this meeting. That preparation that Mr. Natepsky had makes clear that the streets can handle the volumes. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the detail of the streets. Let's go back and start with a neighborhood study, 1999, 13 years ago. At the time that study was established or started, there was pressure to get a study. And the reason there was pressure to get a study was because the single way out for the future development at that point in time was for all the traffic to come down Downer Trail. That was what the record was. And to come out Oregon. There was a lot of interest to the south to get some protection. The city came out through special advertisements and so forth, a massive effort to organize a neighborhood, which is called the Westside neighborhood. The Westside neighborhood plan was put together. All those residents came together as a neighborhood, and they put together a plan which said, with the city involvement in the generation of the plan, that there would be 2 roads, not one to the south, 2 roads, one to the north and one to the south, and that a gate would remain there until the completion of those roads. The Westside neighborhood provided protection through that plan to the people to the south for a decade. They provided political cover for the city to go ahead and do the thing with respect to the connector that the city wanted to do. At the same time, there was a second plan, which was not discussed today, but was in Mark's record, And that second plan was called the Gale Gardner Neighborhood Plan. The Gale Gardner Neighborhood Plan provided acceptance at Gale Gardner for the traffic from the connector, Westridge. It also said in that plan, because I think the people were suspicious of what was up, that they expected fair treatment in the distribution of traffic. Fair treatment does not mean that you put up a gate and dump all the traffic on the Gale Gardner, and I'll talk to that a little bit later. Now, you've got a gate, and you've got a gate in the road which was opened before the gate was moved from Surrey Peaks over to Downer. We used to be able to visit the Wickstroms, and we used to be able to go to about 700 Downer Trail. It was a dirt road, but it was finished to our neighbors. That gate was put in the middle of the prior road, okay? Now, let's talk about the road. I'll come back to Gale Gardner in just a minute. The city assumed responsibility for the Downer Trail. They had a neighborhood meeting, so they say, and I was one of the neighbors involved in it because my house is the house directly south of that gate. That neighborhood did not include the Westside neighborhood. That was a selected group of neighbors, and it was a selected presentation because the presentation did not include the design of a permanent gate and the installation of a permanent gate or the design of the road for termination. I can remember, I was not at the meeting because I was out of town. I can remember writing a letter to the engineer who invited us all and saying, hey, I agree with a 22-foot road because it's a lot better than nothing, but I certainly do not agree to a gate in the middle of the road. I am quite certain that that gate was not discussed with the people along Downer Trail as a permanent gate, nor was it discussed in the Westside neighborhood plan. Now I make another number of points with respect to the gate and what a gate does. A closed gate prevents circulation, effectively terminating the Westside neighborhood. I'll make a recommendation about that for you gentlemen. It diverts traffic to Gale Gardner, and I'll tell you about that. It introduces delay, increases travel times and distances, destroys faith in the neighborhood planning process. You can rewrite history, but you will destroy the neighborhood planning process when you do it. And it increases safety hazards. Let's look at just one, the safety hazard. Mark, in his preparation for you, and more or less said the same thing on the graph here. Response in the area from the police chief and the fire chief say would be enhanced by the removal of the gate. However, their forces are presently able to open the gate in case of an emergency. That is not a very professional response. It's not professional because it doesn't include delay times. Let's consider, for example, in the best of cases, I did this, so I know what I'm talking about. The steps you take when you have a gate as compared with when a gate is open are the following. You're driving at speed and you have to slow to a stop. You have to get out of the vehicle. You have to proceed to the gate. You have to find the right key. You have to find the right lock. You've got to open the gate. Then you open the gate, you go back to the car, you get in the car, you go up, and you resume speed. That's my estimate in the best of cases if you practiced and you're thoughtful before you get there a minute. All right, we just had a demonstration of the fact that in worst case, it could probably be somewhere around 10 or 15 minutes if you were lucky. Now I've had members of the council tell me in past discussions that a fire truck can just drive over that gate. What the hell? I mean, in in an emergency to just drive right on through. I'm not so sure about that, because the debris you'd leave behind if you look at that gate is going to be a severe problem for the smaller vehicles that follow. And a police car, maybe it can get through if it's going downhill, but going uphill, that gate is going to be something else again, even for a police car. As we saw, a foot or so of snow with that particular gate, and I think you got the picture, with that particular gate, is next to an impenetrable barrier if you want to maintain anything like response times. Police and fire are measured by response time. You just blew it. Even a minute in, you can take the cases in between. It's a dark night, you have a new officer. The officer may or may not know about the gate. When they get there, they have to go through the procedure of finding their key, opening the gate in the dark, and so forth. It's not a minute. It might be 2 or 3 minutes. How do you measure response times? Finally, Mr. Mayor, when you and Mr. Lamerson visited with me, and we did that. We did that back in 2010. We spent a lot of time going around and looking at the road, looking at the gate, looking at the various elements of the road and gate. We went around town and we compared the road with other roads in town. And I think I showed you how some of the other roads in town are managed as far as their caution signs, as far as their advisory signs for the prudent driver. And I told you about the problems, like the problem the lady just in front of me had with Gardner, with Oregon Avenue. And I told you there were things that could be done immediately. I made the same statements in 2008 that those things could be done. And nothing has been done to cure the problems that I identified to you and identified to the prior council in 28. So that each time we come and review this, we have people come and tell us how sad it is that Oregon in particular is in the state it is because nobody maintains Oregon. And I told you what the problems were, and nothing's been done. Now I'll tell you, in a year ago, I talked to your council. I spent probably an hour and a half with your council, several of us, and we talked about the potential hazards for the city that were generated by the fact that there had been what I'll call negligence in the address of problems which had been identified through council meetings. You've got a record that says certain things are wrong, and it hasn't been cleared. Very simple. Amidst all of the things I've made you know, I'll state again, I recommend that where you've got dangerous drive, like Carroll's, or like the supervisor's drive on Oregon, that you sign those and you warn the prudent driver ahead of time. That you address directly the right-of-way on Oregon. Oregon's got a 60-foot right-of-way. There's absolutely no reason for cars being shunted in, for pedestrians being shunted into the street because of the cars parked in the wrong ways. At this moment, there is diagonal parking. There are cars diagonally parked.
Mr. Anderson, we're running up on 11 minutes.
Yes,
and,
okay,
we
now
can wrap her up.
let me make two more points. Gale Gardner. Gale Gardner up at Westridge has about 9,600 cars a day. City statistics. At Oregon, it's got 6,700 cars a day. City statistics. Okay. You divert all the traffic from that gate to Gale Gardner. You're not saving Downer Trail. You're burdening Gale Gardner. Every single car that's turned away is another car down on Gale Gardner. And I'll tell you, if you want to look at congestion and problem and so forth, Gale Gardner is the problem. It's not the other streets. The Westside neighborhood plan, And the engineering study, which is quoted, and the volumes that are quoted, came out and assured us when we agreed on the Westside neighborhood plan. And Carol Russell was part of that, Jim Lamerson was part of that plan. That neighborhood came together and they said, the engineering study says that those streets can handle the traffic comfortably that was identified by that study. We hear the same numbers and they're terrible numbers, but they're identified as safe numbers at that time.
Mr. Anderson, I'm gonna ask you to close her down.
Okay, I will. I'll give you the final recommendation. If the council decides to keep the gate, I recommend that you do the following thing. That you call a Westside neighborhood meeting and a Gale Gardner meeting at the time and place conducive to maximum participation. I don't mean in the middle of the day at a city council meeting. And then explain the necessity to terminate those neighborhood plans and thank the neighbors for protecting Oregon and South Downer Trail through these plans for many years. Now, there's been a personal attack on me because at one time I was going to sell my house. My house is not on the market now. I talked to engineers in your department about the fact that I disliked that gate. You know what they told me? What they told me was, get a easement from your next door neighbor. Get an easement and just go around the gate. Simple solution. I did not choose to do that, Mr.
I'm gonna ask that you give me the same courtesy I'm giving you, and
All
it's,
right.
we're gonna shut her off, okay?
That it was just the point that it would have been easy to avoid that, but it was not right.
An interesting afternoon watching the stage play develop. Made a couple of notes regarding the testimony of those for and those against the opening of the gate. I think the first thing I'd like to do is address the studies that were so detailed addressed by Mark Matupsky and Ian Mattingly today, for the reason that I believe that those studies, in particular the 2008 study, would justify this council to pay attention to not just those privileged few that live south of the gate on Downer Trail and Oregon Avenue and Idlewild Drive, but for all of those people who pay taxes, property sales tax, assessments in that whole area, much less those of us that live in the rest of Prescott. But Mark, now you correct me if I speak wrong. The 2008 study, the result was that the volumes that were referenced in that study resulted in these, quote, these volumes are well within the normal ranges for the local residential and minor collector roadway classifications. Then as I read further in that study, and now your comments in the memorandum to these gentlemen on the council, I find that we're talking that you're going to, with the gate open and the full build-out of this Devereaux Empire up here, that there will be another 1,500 vehicles per day would travel on Downer Trail and Oregon Avenue if the gate were not in place. Now, am I correct in quoting you by saying that these volumes in this range are within the normal limits for the minor collector roadway classification, end quote? And as I read those studies, as I have read the general plan for the city of Prescott, the Gale Gardner plan, and the Westside plan, the Downer Trail in Oregon are classified as minor collector roadways.
Jim, I'm going to ask, early on, we agreed that questions would come up this direction, and then we'll try to maneuver them around. And I'd appreciate that.
I'm good at maneuvering, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
All right. So, I would ask the council to take a look at your own memorandum sitting in front of you, which I'm sure you have all read prior to this meeting, and know all those facts because of the detailed questions that I know that were asked today. Addressing the comments from the general public that were made by Ms. Russell and Mr. Tilley and whatnot, I'd like to point out that Mr. Tilley made a very cogent, correct statement when he said, things change. Now, I can speak with some authority regarding things changing in the city of Prescott. I was born in this town 71 and a half years ago, as many of you know, and things do change. I can remember the city blocking off South Pleasant Street, and we would sled down South Pleasant Street with big fires made out of tires. We don't do that anymore because of the traffic. Things change. I was raised on Iron Springs Road, where New Frontiers and Lloyd's Liquors are concerned. If I'd only known then what I know now. And I can remember when that part of Iron Springs Road was not paved. There were barrel ditches that carried all the water down Iron Springs Road. I can remember when Williamson Valley Road was a rural, and that part of Iron Springs Road north of where I lived and Williamson Valley Road was a rural outlet. I can remember my dad could have bought Shadow Valley Ranch, Burt Ranch. My mother refused to live out that far out of town because there was no telephone. Rural. We rode our bicycles, but things change. And I can understand the Oregon and Idlewild and Downer Trail neighborhood residents wanting to maintain this private, exclusive enclave. But things change. It doesn't happen anymore. And I appreciated Mr. Devereaux's comments about riding his bike and going around to Donner Pond and whatnot. We all did that kind of thing. But things change. And I believe that this council has got an obligation not to just those few people in that enclave of Idlewild, Oregon, and Donner, but to all the citizens of Prescott, but in particular with those people who live north of the gate on Downer Trail at Sierra Peaks, west of Iron Springs Road, and east of the city limit line over there by the Hicks property. We all pay the taxes. We all paid our share of the development of West Ridge and Sierra Peaks and the utilities and whatnot that is in there. It is not right that Idlewild, Oregon, and Downer Enclave enjoy the amenities of being a private enclave without paying for same. My subdivision where I live, and I've lived for 36 years, we own our roads, we maintain our roads, and we pay the taxes on those roads as well as the property that the roads of Sierra Peaks and Downer Trail and Oregon Avenue and Idlewild Drive are on. It's not right. And I think that city councils of the city of Prescott have done a disservice to the citizens of Prescott, Arizona in buying onto the emotion that you've seen expressed here today by those that do not want Downer Trail open. I don't understand it when your own engineering department has said that the volumes with the gate down on Downer, Oregon, Idlewild are within the normal limits and the normal ranges for a local residential area. I would submit to this council that the lady that just spoke before me, I don't recall her name, McMillan, I believe, that a detailed study be done with that gate being opened and it being conducted by an independent agency, if that's what the residents in Oregon and Downer Trail would like to do, so that you can justify not opening that gate or justify opening that gate on a permanent basis. I find it unlike Mr. Tilley, as I don't know him well, but I know his reputation, that he doesn't believe that you can do another study and it's going to be worth anything. That's not correct, because things change. And things have changed since the city did its work with Mr. Devereaux back in 04, 06, whatever dates those were. Things have changed, and it's time that you take a look at another traffic study that is geared primarily to the circulation of traffic. This is not within the parameters of the general plan for the city of Prescott, which calls for circulation of traffic within the whole town. Not going to say any more because I'm just repeating what I said at our last meeting, but I'm open for any questions at this time.